Welcome to Friday Friends, RI Elder Info's weekly look at the organizations and individuals providing resources for Rhode Island seniors, caregivers, and professionals.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It is 9 o'clock on Friday, and you are watching me, Deb Burton, the host of Friday Friends, where every week I bring you a guest and information that you or someone you know needs to know about. So please hit the like button, the share button, all the social media bells and whistles that say, hey, check this out, because today we are talking with Christina Burke about the situation that many of us are experiencing, and that is being the sandwich generation, where we're caring for aging loved ones while also raising the kids and trying to figure out the balance on that. So please help us get the word out by hitting the share button, the like, the follow, all of those things, because this is something that a lot of us are experiencing every day. Now, as you all know, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we could not do this without the support of our sponsors. So a big thank you to United Healthcare, as well as McCarthy Law for sponsoring our Friday Friends. Here's a message from McCarthy Law.
Here at McCarthy Law, we practice in the areas of estate planning, long-term care planning, elder care law, and residential real estate. Our focus is really on providing peace of mind to our clients.
If you're interested in scheduling a consultation with our office, you can feel free to reach out to us at 401-541-5540. You can also reach out via website at www.mccarthylawri.com. You also should check out our social media, both on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for some helpful tips and tricks.
Welcome, Christina. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too. So please share with everybody what your role is there.
Yeah, sure. So at McCarthy Law, I am an elder care coordinator. So what that is that, I'm a social worker. I assist clients and their families with basically the next transitions in their life. So whether it's, mom's in the hospital because she fell and she can't return home. So maybe helping advocate for a rehab stay at a nursing facility, or, mom's at home, she's not doing well. I can give them resources on how to keep her at home, whether it's with home care, certain durable medical equipment, all of those things. Someone's in a crisis in the hospital, the children are out of state, they don't know what to do. Us as the elder care coordinators can go out to the hospital, work with the doctors, the case managers there, just trying to, advocate for that client and figure out what the next steps are.
That's amazing. So these days, like so many folks are in that in between, literally that sandwich generation where they're trying to balance caring for their older loved ones while, also, trying to get to soccer practice and dance class and all of these things. So how do people deal with this? What are some effective methods for managing all of this?
Well, I'm glad that you said that. It's the sandwich generation is like, there's really no age, like some, it's not like a teen year. It's like, it can range from, somebody in their 30s to somebody in their 60s. It really is a big, wide gap. And it's not talked about a lot, which I think is interesting too. I think it's just until recently people really talk about it. And maybe it's because, the generation before ours was more private, wanted to handle things on their own, didn't seek help, there wasn't a lot of resources. The internet wasn't out there, all those things, social media, all those things. So I'm glad that it's kind of something that is, that people are talking about now, because, I couldn't imagine doing that without the support of others. My mom lives with me, so I am in that generation myself personally, I have a 17-year-old son. So, you definitely feel like you're being pulled in two different directions, and it's kind of hard just to prioritize which direction you should go in. So I think the first step is obviously just seek out support. I think it's also something that, you talk about with your friends, because most of them are probably going through a very similar situation. So I think it's really about, who you have beside you, who your support network is. So, I mean, I think definitely also using resources. There's a lot of support groups out there that are free, and a lot of them are virtual. I mean, personally, me as a social worker, I would definitely recommend in person, going to see people. I think it just makes it a big difference. But if you aren't able to do that due to work and obligations, I would definitely recommend, seeking something out, at least just to listen, because it always, you don't even have to share. I used to host a caregiver support group, and I had this one gentleman who came to all my support groups, never said anything, never shared, just sat there. And my assumption was that he wasn't getting anything out of it. Like he was just, maybe his wife made him go. I don't know. But he would show up. So one day after the meeting, I had a conversation with him, and he said, I feel so good after I have these meetings just to listen to somebody with a similar situation. And it reassures me that I'm not the only one, that this is just something that people are going through, and that it's not just me struggling. So for me, that just made it all the difference. So even just going out there and listening to what other people have to say, I think is huge.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes you're right. A lot of times we turn to our friends, but our friends might not have the depth of knowledge that we need on the resources that are available to really help people remain at home. And I think, what fits for, my friend's mom might not, fit for my family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely think you have to do your own research too. The senior centers are a good way to start. They always offer a lot of support, or they can lead you in the right direction if you're not sure where to go. I think that's also a good tool to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when seeking support, I've heard people say that they don't feel necessarily comfortable going to caregiver support groups because they don't want to feel like they have to talk. So I appreciate that you share, like, this gentleman didn't speak.
Mm-mm.
He just came.
Yep.
And it's not something that, like, people are forced to.
Absolutely.
You must speak.
Right. No, it's all voluntary. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, sometimes it's good just to sit back and listen. Definitely.
Yep. So if you're somebody who, maybe this week, you got the call, we'll say your loved one just had a stroke and they're over at the hospital, and, it's also coming up on winter break, and you're trying to figure out, like, how am I getting coverage for the children when they're on winter break, and I've got to work and I've got to go back and forth to the hospital and figure out facilities and how are we paying for this and where do we get home modifications, and oh my God, all of those things. What would you recommend to that family member who's really getting squished down in that sandwich?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And I think that happens very frequently. Obviously, I don't want to toot our own horn here, but, that's something that we handle. That's a lot about what we do as elder care coordinators. We definitely step in as that middle ground. So that way the family can do other things, that, the other obligations, and not feel guilty, and just know that their family is taken care of with somebody who knows the medical field and knows that generation, and they're comfortable with that. And we can probably give them resources quicker than they can find on their own, and we can assess the situation. They may think, okay, my mom needs this type of setting. Well, she may not. She may be able to just, get by with 4 hours a day of increased help. We'll look at the whole picture. We'll look at the whole package, the financial piece, which is huge too. A lot of families, working families, they don't have the funds, and they see, they look up and they Google, oh my gosh, home care, or they look up, nursing home placement, and they're just like, wow, like, I can't afford that. I can't do that. And I think it's very important too, to have a conversation with your parents about, their financial situation, what their long-term, care plan, their plans are, asset protection, where do they want their money going to? Because a lot of the families, they have this income for when this time comes, and it's hard for families to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
important.
Because, sometimes how would you help a caregiver who has made the statement of, I promise I'll never have you go to a nursing home, but the reality is that caregiver just cannot provide the care that is needed. How do you start to approach that conversation as a professional?
Well, that's a very hard subject. I always tell people, I try to encourage, people not to make promises, because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. Tomorrow mom could be in a car accident and be permanently disabled, and you have a full-time job and you have kids and you can't take time off work, and she's 24-hour care. As much as we want to keep our parents home and we want to keep them independent and living on their own, it's not always feasible. And that's okay. And most of the people that go into nursing homes don't voluntarily go into there, but they do adjust and they do well. And they really figure out that, okay, this isn't as bad as it seems, or an assisted living or whatever the case may be. I think having an honest conversation with your parents, telling them that, yes, of course, I would love to keep you home for as long as possible, but I can't promise that because I just don't know what the future will hold. But obviously, if you can care for yourself, you have to figure out what you can do, like what you can personally deal with. Like if a family member works from home, so maybe it's feasible. But if I don't work at home. If something happens to my mom who lives with us, there's not somebody there that can care for her. I want her to be safe.
Yep. Do you find sometimes that when that loved one maybe does need to transition into a higher level of care, whether that's an assisted living facility or maybe even a nursing home, that family dynamic changes for the positive?
Absolutely. I see that all the time. Absolutely. I see their relationship get back to mother and son, or, whatever the case is. It's no longer caregiver, and then it's like, they're constantly like, making sure mom takes her meds, making sure, mom's safe, checking in, not able to go away on vacation because you're worried that something will happen to her, like all these little things. You can't go on a date night with your loved one because you don't want them to feel left out, all those things. And as soon as that happens, and as soon as someone transitions to assisted living, that role, it reverses back into being a family member. And that's what I try to encourage families, is that, you want to be their family. You don't want to be their caregiver.
Yeah.
It deals, and I see a lot of people too, like caregiver burnout is a true thing. People end up in the hospital because they're not caring for themselves because they're worried about their loved one. I had a situation with a married couple where a gentleman was caring for his wife who had dementia. He was frail himself, but he wanted to keep her with him at all times. Finally, the assisted living that they were living at told him, she can no longer live here because God forbid something happens to you, then what's going to happen to her? Like if you go out because you fell and broke your hip, now she's alone and we can't keep her safe. So it broke his heart. He fought tooth and nail to try to keep her, even though we in the facility were trying, to encourage him, keep her here. And I'm telling you, Deb, a month after she was admitted, first of all, she adapted quickly. She loved it. She was active, singing. She was a retired nurse, so she loved being around all the other nurses and the CNA. She felt like she was helping. They gave her little tasks to do. And he would come every day, and I saw him gain weight. He didn't have to use his cane. His cane was there. He was sleeping Whereas before he would never sleep because he was worried that she was going to get up and go somewhere in the middle of the night.
Yep.
It was wonderful. And he was laughing and like his whole demeanor changed and she loved it. She never gave him a hard time when he left. She always loved seeing him, but she was fine when he left. And it just made the relationship so positive. And it kept him healthy because he would have been in that same situation sooner than later if he tried to continue to take care of her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that caregiver burnout and caregiving can really wear on the health of the caregiver. Whereas in some situations, the individual that requires care may not necessarily realize how taxing it is on the caregiver's health, and the caregiver gets sick first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not often talked about. And it's important that caregivers be aware of that, if you're, running back and forth between, their house and your house and trying to get all these things done, that can wear on your health too. And that's really where having that professional help, a trusted resource would be so valuable.
Yeah. And it doesn't just affect, obviously your medical and physical situation. Mostly it's your mental. That's the part that's super concerning. And that then affects everything else. Yeah. And sometimes people don't even realize that they have become depressed or, because they've kind of just done it naturally. And then, as it progresses, outsiders start to realize it, but they personally don't because they're just continuing to do what they feel is necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where accepting the feedback of those around you is also really important. So that, if you're with your friends and you're saying like, I'm struggling to take care of my loved ones, and they're saying you really ought to get some help, I think it's important to really receive that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's important because, you need to care, you need to care for yourself. Self-love is a huge thing. And I think it's neglected when you're a caregiver. So I think it's very important. And when you're in that sandwich generation, it's hard for you to do something special for yourself because you're torn between other situations that, you put yourself on the back burner, which should not be the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Christina, I'm so glad you took the time to come on today. I think this was a really important conversation to have because so many people are in that sandwich generation.
Absolutely. No, I see it. And like we said earlier, it's just a huge range of an age. It can be somebody in their 30s. It can be even, younger, and it can be somebody in their 80s or 90s too. I mean, it's such a huge range. It just depends. But yeah, the sandwich generation, it definitely exists, and it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah,
hard.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, you're so sweet. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Everybody, when Christina talks about the sandwich generation, and it can be across ages, think about the 30-year-old who is caring for the individual in their 60s and maybe their great-grandparents in their 90s. That's really not all that uncommon here in Rhode Island. It can be a triple-decker sandwich, and you sometimes feel like you're just getting squished. And it's important that you reach out for the help and support that you need. Christina is with McCarthy Law. She's more than happy to help you. You can always turn to RI Elder Info. Come to our website, rielderinfo.com. Give me a call, the 401-585-0509. Always happy to answer your questions, but please don't feel that you're alone. There are resources available to give you support and to help you navigate, because no one's born knowing all of these things. And like the song says, we really do get by with a little help from our friends. So, friend, I am glad that you have joined us here today. I look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, be well and be kind.